Okay, you're good. Before we reassemble the clutch linkage, we're going to go ahead and install a new bushing inside of the clutch lever. And to do that, you want to drive the old one out. Probably the easiest way is if you have a nice bushing driver set, something like this. You can pick those up at any auto parts supply store. And drive the old bushing out and clean everything up and drive your new bushing in. You got to be careful with these bushings because they are split. So if you happen to drive it unevenly, you can drive the bushing in, as I would say, cockeyed, and that can cause a problem. Just be careful to drive it evenly, and just take your time. If you have access to a press, that's probably the safest way to do this. So before we actually install the clutch pivot pin and the clutch lever, something important to look at is if your lever may be worn. Actually, the cast part of the lever may be worn where it rubs up against the pin. I found in experience to true those up, to kind of, if nothing else, take a file and get them nice and flush, reasonably flush. And then stick the pin through and observe how much of the neck, that's not spline, but actually the part that is the larger diameter where your bushing would seat onto. And just look and see how much gap you have there. We want that to be fairly tight. So in this case, we're going to use a washer that's approximately 50 thousandths of an inch thick. And it's something you may just want to play with, but just I bought this at a hardware store. It's a machine washer approximately 50 thousandths thick. And looking at the shoulder on the bolt now is only protruding past the clutch lever, maybe 15-20 thousandths of an inch. So that's going to get us pretty close and ensure our clutch lever is nice and tight. Definitely something you want to think of before we install it. We certainly don't want to have to pull the pin back out to add a washer. So what we're doing right now before we actually install the clutch lever and the pivot pin is to smear a little grease on the bushing, because Deere did not put a provision in here for any grease after the fact. So although they're oil permeated bushings, still not a bad idea to smear a little grease in there for some lubrication before we get going. Something else we also did, which in the past is usually an afterthought, it's much easier to actually install the clutch linkage to the clutch lever, where you can get because if you don't do it ahead of time, it's a real bear to twist your cotter key around like it ought to be. It's sort of a time saver, and you'll appreciate doing this ahead of time. Alright, so here we've got a handy dandy custom clutch pin installer tool. And of course I realize not everybody's going to have one of these, but if you didn't have one, you could probably, it's best to use a C-clamp and perhaps a piece of pipe or a spacer to allow the end of the clutch pin to come through. But the idea here is we want to pull the pin through. This is not a spot to use a hammer, and I repeat, not a spot to use a hammer, as many of those ears on the top of the reduction cover are broken due to Farmer Joe and his hammer. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and slide this on. And
Tyler, can you give me a 15/16 wrench?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've got one right here. Wow, that's a wrench. Made in the United States. You know, that wrench reminds me of the days when men were proud to use wrenches, and the women were in the kitchen. But it's good stuff. So what we're going to do is be drawing that pin slowly but surely into its place. And the idea here is we only want to pull the clutch pivot pin in far enough that the threads protrude through the first reduction housing there, to allow us to put the nut on and tighten the nut at the end of the process, drawing it all together. Again, the key word is drawing it together, not beating it, hammering it, or torching it. Something we wanted to note in with this project, you'll notice in the clutch operating arm, actually when we went to drilling the 9/16 hole, we found that there had been some brazing done in years past, which was covered up by paint. And there's actually a crack in the operating arm, and may cause a problem, it may not. We're going to take a chance in this case, but in some instances, if you got to inspecting your linkages and you see that the parts have been well worn, and by drilling a 9/16 hole it may further weaken the part. It may make more sense to, if you're comfortable doing it, welding it solid and re-drilling your hole, or taking it to a competent machinist. They can either weld it in solid and re-drill the hole for you, or I've seen bushings put in as well to use standard size clutch linkage pins. There's a couple ways to do it, but either way, thank goodness the 9/16 pins are available. It makes the job a little simpler if you've got good parts. Alright, so now we're set up, ready. We've got the pin into the reduction gear housing far enough that we could go ahead and start the nut on the back side. Now clearly this is pertaining to tractors here that use a live PTO shaft, and mainly the 20 and 30 series tractors, where your A's and B's and 50s, 60s and that sort of thing are not going to be not going to have to deal with all the foot operated power shaft items, but either way it's still appropriate to draw the pivot pin in with the nut, tightening up evenly as you go. Again, no hammers. And I think we're using another vintage wrench from when men were men. Made in the USA. Gotta like that. So we're going to draw it all the way in and connect up the rest of the linkage.